Good morning, 1100. Welcome back to Module 3. We're starting off a new week, and this week we're going to be focusing on talking about sheet layouts, title blocks, and also sheet naming standards. So we're getting into plans, we're just not necessarily getting into the content of the drawing area yet. What we're going to start off is get familiar with what a typical plan or what a typical sheet looks like. So if you've taken a Revit class, this sheet right here probably looks really familiar to you. If you haven't taken a Revit class, just know that in time this sheet will become really familiar to you. It's the generic title block that's built into Revit, and since most people in this class will be taking a Revit course or have taken a Revit course, I thought it would be a great place to start. So with that, let's go on to the next slide that gives us an overview of what we're going to be taking a look at. So this is what I consider to be a typical sheet layout, and I'm really following National CAD standards this week. So if you look at National CAD standards, this is how they would also lay out their sheets. So you can see that this sheet is broken down into different areas. Maybe the most obvious one is this one here in the middle, called the drawing area. And the drawing area right here is where all of the architectural plans, details, sections, elevations, basically anything that you model up, this is where you will place it on the sheet. Now, when you're working in a program like AutoCAD or Revit, you do all of your drawing in a separate area than this sheet. So what you would do first is you would do your drawing in your model area, and then there are different techniques to get those drawings from your project browser or from your model space onto the actual sheet. So again, we're focusing on the sheet today. We also have something called the production area. And if you take a look at my cursor, it actually wraps all around these three sides right here. This is the production area. And inside that production area, we're going to look at this a little bit closer. We've got some information that we'll be going over. We've got our actual title block area, and we're going to break that down bit by bit. So the entire sheet consists of three main areas: our drawing area, the production or data area, and the title block. Now, starting with the production area, it's typically located somewhere around the border, these three sides as I pointed out. And what it does is it includes this tiny little file path right here, and it goes through some information that's really important within the firm. So if you're working on a plan, you can actually put a timestamp of when you actually printed that drawing. And that timestamp, when I say printed that drawing, it could be you physically printed it to a printer, or you could have printed it as a PDF. So either way, it'll put a timestamp on it. And the other thing that it will also include is the file path, so that if there are 5 people working on a project and they open up that sheet, they might not know exactly where it's located on the network. They should know, but just in case, the production area is another great place to find that information. So again, in a nutshell, the production area has a timestamp of when it was printed, physically or as a PDF, and it can also include the file path of where this drawing is located on your network or on your computer. Again, I think that the drawing area might be the most obvious. So it's located within the borders of the sheet, and it typically includes a grid. We like to start, rather than centering our drawings, sorry, let me get a better cursor. We like, rather than putting plans right in the middle, we actually like to start at the lower right-hand corner, like this. So something like that. And the reason why is where you're sitting right now, imagine what it would be like holding a set. So typically the set is bound over here on your left side. Hopefully you can see my cursor going down. This is where it's bound or stapled. So because of that, it's really easy to place your hand here, and using your thumb, you can quickly go through the drawings. So that will allow people to quickly see the sheet name over here on the lower right hand, as well as whatever information is on that sheet. So the drawing area is where we put drawings, notes, key plans, schedules, etc. We will be spending the rest of the semester going over drawings, notes, key plans, schedules, etc. Again, today, or this module, is to help us just get to know what specifically goes on a sheet. Now moving on from there, this is what the grid looks like. So this is important for you guys to remember. We're going to have questions on this. It's going to be a timed quiz, so it won't just be questions, but it's actually a timed quiz. And this is a typical National CAD standard layout. Depending on the firm that you work with or the drawing that you're looking at, you might find that they don't have a grid, or they have a grid that differs from this. So this particular grid starts in the lower left-hand corner, and we've got A1, A2, A3, and it keeps going. And then the next row is B, and we come across like that. And I've given some examples here. So if there's a detail that fits within the square right here, you can see that this fits in the D2, and it's only one module big. So each one of these are known as a module. Now if your detail gets a little bit taller and a little bit bigger, this is known as the B3, and it's 2 modules. And if you can see, it also encompasses C3, but because the bottom portion where the title block tag would typically go, it's always placed on the bottom portion of it. Here's another example. Here's a 4-module grid, and because the most bottom right one is A6, we'll call this one A6. So the standard rule of thumb is bottom and then right hand. Okay. So columns are always numbers, rows are letters, and again, this is National CAD standard. So depending on the firm that you work with, it could differ. Moving on from there, let's talk about the title block. So the title block in of itself will have 6 different content areas, and we're going to break each one of those down right now. So the first one is the designer identification. So this will include the architect on the project. So it's really funny, in Revit, where it says Autodesk, they're giving themselves a lot of credit. They're like, we as Revit are the designer, but this really is typically where the architect or the designer's logo would go. And then this is also an area for consultants to add their information. So if you are working with an electrical, mechanical, you'll absolutely be working with the structural consultant, their information can come here as well. I have to keep saying this. Now this is kind of like National CAD standard stuff, and we're looking at a generic template from Revit. So again, depending on the firm that you're working with and taking a look at plans throughout the rest of the semester. And in fact, next week we will be opening up about half of a dozen PDF plan sets for you guys, and you are going to go through and see what, if any, of the standards the firms followed. But it doesn't necessarily have to be in this detail. Sorry, let me go back down to that. So you might find that this information is like on the bottom half or in the middle instead of the top. The important thing is that they include this information somewhere. Now after that, we've got project information. So we've established who the designer is, but now we need to know what project we're working on. So is there a client name? Is there an owner name? And what I mean by that is, as an architect, sometimes I'm hired by an individual. So that could be, if my family hired me, it would be like the Nawabi residence. Or it could be something like the Salt Lake Community College hires me to do their building. In that case, it's an institution's name or a business name. So Salt Lake Community College, Starbucks, it could be either one of those. So you could do the client name, You could even include the building name there. So for example, if we're going along with the Salt Lake Community College, maybe I'm working on a technology building remodel, okay? It's also helpful to include the project address. So not just where the owner or the business is centrally located, but the actual project. So another example of this, remember when I said that my family hired me? Let's say that they live in a home, but they're building a new cabin on a piece of property somewhere. We want the project address to be the piece of property that the cabin is being built on. The reason why is if you have a consultant or even a sub-consultant or even a material supplier and they're trying to get to your site or deliver materials, it helps to have the project address on the drawings so they can easily see where it's located. Now there's something here called phasing, and we'll talk about that more later on in the semester, but sometimes projects are so big that they span over time. So if you're designing a campus, you might do it in different phases. Like phase 1 are 3 buildings, phase 2 is finishing up, 4 buildings, and then the third phase just might be one really, really big building. So again, phases just talk about the specific phase that you might be in the project. We've also got issue dates, and issue dates encompass a whole bunch of things. And this kind of goes back into our contract documents. I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just know that the first time a project gets printed, it gets an issue date here. And then sometimes after it gets printed and distributed, we find that there might be errors or omissions, and that would go into something called an addendum. Okay, so we change something and we have to reprint it. So you put on here, what date number, the number, the description of why you're reprinting it and the date. So it could be number 1, it could be addendum 1, and then the date. And then even after we've fixed our drawings, there could be revisions. Maybe our owner decides that they don't necessarily like the exterior finished material that we've selected, so we can change that. It could also be that there's some things that are out of budget that we also need to kind of value engineer, so we can include that. So maybe number 2 is a value engineering revision, and then the date would come after the first one. And then we've got project management numbers. So these are pretty important. The first one is just the project number within the firm. So the project number within the firm is important because all of the drawings, specifications, invoices, so all of the billing ties into this project number. So company-wide, that's a really important number to have. So here we've got our official issue date. So it's not the same as these revisions up here, but this is the official issue date. So the issue date might have been like the final drawings will be submitted on February 1st, 2019. But we could actually have like 1 or 2 revisions after that. So sometimes you will see that there is a difference between those. Okay. Drawn by is 1 or 2 people within the firm who have worked on this particular sheet, so that if there's questions within the firm or outside of the company, they can find whoever worked on those drawings. And typically the drawn by is just an initial. So my drawn by would be NN for Naima Nawabi. It's typically not the first name. If it was me and somebody else, it would be NN, comma, and then another set of initials. And then the checked by, that's also within the company. This is typically the project architect or the project manager that's overseeing the entire project within the firm. This is where their initials would go. And there would also be an area where they stamp the drawings. So here in this Autodesk set, they don't include an area for something that's called the wet stamp. And the wet stamp is basically your seal of approval and your liability as an architect and a designer. And most of the time that is built into the title block, but some people just put it off to the side. So the reason why I'm mentioning the wet stamp right now is usually whoever checks it is also the person stamping it. So again, one thing that we don't see actually accounted for here is a place for the stamp. Now if I were to redo this Revit title block, I might put it up here. I might get rid of one of these consultants and put an area for a wet stamp. You could also just put it somewhere out in the drawings and not have a designated spot for it. Now, the title sheet block, this defines the sheet contents. So this would be if it was a plan, elevation, section, details, so what is actually on the sheet. Sometimes you might even see that this varies, but again, if we're going with National CAD standards, typically this wouldn't vary. Now in just a few minutes, we're going to hop into the different sheet types. So we'll get more into the sheet contents as well as this portion right here, the sheet identification and sheet number. We'll get into that as well here in just a moment. So this is one of the most important things, the sheet identification and sheet number. What that does is it organizes all of our drawings by discipline, content type, and then just numerical numbering as well. So let's hop into that. And let me go back. I apologize. Let me go back real quick. So this is what we're covering as far as title blocks go. That's all of the information. So if you need to watch this a couple times, please do. But just know that we will have a quiz, a timed quiz that goes over all of that content. So I hope that you're feeling comfortable with it. All right, now let's get into sheet naming standards. So let me hop up one more time. Sorry for all the back and forth. So we just talked about this sheet number. I want to go through the National CAD standard way of naming your sheets. Because if you're working on a project set, you shouldn't just go through and name your sheets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's really no organization in that. So National CAD standards have divided their sheets into 3 different categories. The first 1 or 2 letters are called discipline designators. So it consists of 1 alphabetical character or 2 alphabetical characters and maybe even a hyphen. Okay? I typically just work with 1 alphabetical character. And I keep mentioning that next week one of your assignments will be to look at real PDF plans. And it will be to look and see how much of these National CAD standards they're following, including the discipline designators. So the first component of the sheet identification format, the discipline designator, is based on the traditional system of alphabetical discipline designators, using either a single alphabetical character with a hyphen or 2 alphabetical characters. And we're going to break those down on the next page. The next one is the sheet designator. So this consists of 1 numerical character. And then the last one is the sheet sequence number. So this is typically 2 or even 3 digits because sometimes there are plan sets that have over 100 sheets. So National CAD Standard says that it's followed by 0, 2 through 99. There are sheet sets that go over 100, so in this case we would have to add another sequence number. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. So when we talked about the discipline designator, these first 2 right here, these are all of the different categories that we have, and these are the order that they should appear in your plan set. So take a moment, I'm going to ask you a question, maybe even pause. Do structural drawings come before or after architectural drawings? Go ahead and pause. Now if we look here, structural comes before architectural. We have interiors, equipment, fire protection, mechanical, electrical. The most common sheets are G, general, C for civil, L for landscape, S for structural, A for architectural. Some projects have interiors, some don't. And then plumbing, mechanical, electrical, those are the most common. Now, when I say most common, that just means that typical firms doing typical projects. Depending on the firm that you're working with, if you guys specialize in working on telecommunications rooms, this is going to be a really common sheet for you, okay? And analogy that I like to give is that although we are looking at the national CAD standards, it's kind of like a speed limit. So when you guys are driving to school, let's say the speed limit is 40 or 50 miles an hour on Redwood and the streets surrounding our school. Now, do you guys go exactly 40 or 50 miles an hour every single day? Probably not. You might go a little bit below, most likely you go a little bit above. And this is kind of the same thing. These are standards that most people should be following, but people kind of break with standard. Sheet designators. This is so important to me. So sheet designators organize the plan set into the type of information that's on the sheet. So I'm going to start with plans. So all plans should be, let me start that thought over again, excuse me. So after the discipline designator, there will come a sheet designator. So for example, if we're working with architectural, we'll have an A, and then if it's a section, it'll be A3. And if it's the first sheet of the sections, that's when we jump into the sheet sequence. So our sheet sequence will always be a 0, 1, and then it goes up from there. Now take a minute and think about this. Why wouldn't we have a sheet called 0, 0? Well, if we're talking about numbers of sheets, there is no such thing as a 0, 0 sheet because it doesn't exist. It's always 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. I'm going to come back to sheet designators for just a bit. The reason why I didn't spend too much time on them is throughout the semester, we're actually going to go through and study each one of these individually. So let me just go through and talk about these in general. So 0, general, these are symbols, legends, notes, etc. Basically, things that aren't drawings. They could even be diagrams. A lot of people put their specification sections here, but essentially it's everything but drawings. Now, the 1 series, those are our plans. So they're horizontal views, plan and profiles. 2s are exterior elevations. So these are vertical views. And exterior is the important thing to remember there. 3 are sections. So section views are something like, if you can imagine, if you're looking at an exterior elevation, and then you cut the building in half and you're looking inside, so you not only see the insides of the room, but the structural components and how the building was put together. Those are sections. We've got the 4, the large scale views. So in here, we usually have interior elevations, as well as just any other large scale views. Now 5 are details. So details are large scale views as well. So as we break down each of these sections, or each one of these sheet designators throughout the semester, we'll talk about the typical scale of these as well. Schedules and diagrams, again, these are mostly tables and information and not necessarily plans. 7 and 8, they are kind of user defined. So if you need an extra designation, those are there for you. And then 9 are 3D representations. So those are our common sheet designators. Now this week for your assignment, I'm going to be asking you guys to kind of break down different sheet names. So here's an example. If we wanted to do an architectural plan, an architectural section, 4th page in, this is how we would start. So A for architectural would be the first part, and then the second part would be our sheet designation. So we've got plans, and then after that, since it's the 4th page, we've got 104. So I apologize, I think I said sections. I had another example earlier. So let me go through that again. So the example that we're working with is we have an architectural plan, 4th sheet in. So A for architectural, we've got a plan, that's our 1, and then 4th sheet in would be 04. So this is what your homework looks like. So we did the example from your homework. So the discipline is architectural, and since there's a 1 after it, the sheet type is a plan. The other thing that I'd like you guys to do is I want you to make your own sheet designations as well. So what would a mechanical plan 3rd page look like? Go ahead and pause and kind of skip back up and let's see what it'll look like. All right, so the designation for mechanical is M. It's a plan, so we've got 1, and it's the 3rd page, so it's 03. Put them all together, M103 would be our sheet. That's what you guys will be looking at this week. So I will put this whole lecture on our website if you kind of wanted to break it down and look at it on your own. I will also have your homework assignment posted, which are those last 2 sheets that I just showed you. Please let me know if you guys have any questions or need anything else. If I don't hear from you, I wish you all a good week, and I'll see you next time.